Now, I know how we all feel about plastic all-in-ones. I am no different, and I wholeheartedly agree with you. However, the fact that they're cheap doesn't take away from how quintessentially 80s they are and how fun that makes them, especially when you actually manage to find one that's in perfect working condition like I have here. Today, for your consideration, I present the Panasonic SG-V11 all-in-one combo stereo. It's plastic, it's silver, it has redundant unnecessary text, it's extremely cheap, and I absolutely love it. Stick around. I'm excited. I have wanted to do one of these all-in-ones since I started this channel, and I've been looking for one at every estate sale, thrift store, garage sale, and flea market that I could find. They are always thoroughly trashed, filthy, missing parts. They've got broken dust covers, smashed faceplates. I was starting to think that I was never going to find one in good enough shape to show on the channel. Then, about 2 weeks ago, I was at an estate sale in Desert Hot Springs, and the guy had this thing sitting in his dusty rec room, and it actually worked. So, like a giddy child, I brought it home, and we're going to take a look at it today. This beautiful machine, and yes, I think it's beautiful, has 4 main functions: a cassette player, a turntable, a radio, which has both AM and FM functionality, and an amplifier. Let's look at the radio first, since that's probably the most straightforward part. The AM radio is all internal. Rather than the typical ferrite bar, they've opted for a large loop antenna on the inside, which I will show you once I get it open. The FM function is split into a mono and auto setting. The mono is monaural and seems to have a slightly different bandwidth, which eliminates static from weaker channels. I noticed it especially on talk radio stations. By contrast, the auto setting is the stereo function, and it engages the stereo multiplexing. If on that setting a stereo station is found, the FM stereo light will come on. The tuner scale is my favorite part of this whole machine. The burgundy stripes and gray grid pattern are cool enough, but the fact that they wrote out frequency modulation and amplitude modulation instead of just FM and AM, that is the parmesan on the pasta for me. Add to that the little red tuner light, and you've got all the 80s camp of a John Hughes movie. Also, fun fact, that tuner light acts as your power indicator. It is always on when the machine is on, regardless of the selector position. Next, let's look at the tape player. This machine is a fully functional tape player and recorder. The eject button on the left opens the tape carriage, allowing you to insert your cassette tape side down and close it. It runs left to right, so make sure your empty reel is on the right side. I also appreciate the burgundy stripes on the window. Classy. The transport controls are located to the right of the tape cartridge. You have your rewind and fast forward, your stop and play, and then pause and record. All chrome, naturally. Rewind and fast forward behave normally when the machine is stopped. You hit them and they will continue until you either stop or reach the end of the tape. However, when the tape is playing, they act as reverse and cue and will only enact their functions for as long as you hold them down. As soon as you let go, the tape will play again. The play and record functions are interesting because they allow you to use the machine in conjunction with a timer or other remote switch if you want to. Essentially, they'll activate the record and play function as soon as power is supplied to the machine. Just plug it into the remote switch, insert your tape, turn the power switch on, and press play. As soon as the switch is flipped, the machine will play. To record with the timer, you first need to pretend that this is a timer. There we go. Now it's a timer. Then you insert a blank tape and tune to the station that you want, then turn it off, hook it to the timer, and turn the power switch and hit record. As soon as the timer supplies power to the machine, it'll record from whatever input you have selected, which is FM radio in this case. When it gets to the end of the tape, whether that's during play, record, fast forward, or rewind, it automatically stops. The pause button lights up this little yellow LED and, like most tape machines, differs from the stop by keeping the mechanism engaged and spooled up rather than releasing it and powering down like the stop button. In this case, it seems most useful for bypassing the spool up time since there's no recording level control. There is a working analog tape counter though. To reset it, you just hit this black button. One final note with the cassette player, there's no Dolby noise reduction and no tape type selector. It just treats every tape the same, so your mileage will vary with different tape types. The assumption is that type 1 is the most ideal, but other types can be used with varying degrees of effectiveness. They did, however, include a lever which engages with the write protect notch on tapes to prevent them being recorded if the tab is missing. Now, before we go up top and look at the turntable, let's look at the rest of the face. The power switch and volume control are the same knob. Next to that is the tone knob. Rather than boosting the highs or the lows, this acts more like a mix, the same way the temperature control dial works on a shower, or more accurately, the tone control on a guitar. The balance knob does what you would expect. It adjusts the volume of the left and right speakers to sound more or less even. Or, if you tend to sit closer to one speaker than the other, you can turn it down and boost the other so that they still sound balanced. The selector switch you've already seen, and the tuning knob is the large one to the far right. To the left of the volume knob is the ubiquitous headphone jack, which does deactivate the speakers when you plug something into it. The mic input highlights a common design choice that you see in systems like this. It's always active. It doesn't turn anything on or off, and its input signal is simply mixed into whatever's playing through the speakers, or headphones, or being recorded, or whatever. That's true with everything on this machine. Everything is always active if the power is on. If you're listening to a tape, for example, the record player will still spin. Same with the radio. That's not really that weird for something like this, considering it records tapes, so more than one thing needs to be able to run at the same time. This whole row of labels is meant to look like buttons, but none of them move save one. That's the start and stop button for the turntable, which I suppose means we should probably take a look at the record player now. The turntable is under this tinted dust cover. Admittedly, there is a little damage on the outside because, once again, somebody set something on it for a long time and it melted the plastic. Please, if you learn nothing else from watching my videos, at least don't leave things on the dust cover, especially anything plastic. It will eventually melt through it and you can't really fix it at that point. This is a fully automatic turntable, which even has a record changer function, but that requires a special spindle and adapter. I'm not clear whether those would have come automatically with this unit, but I imagine they would have. If anybody happens to have the spindle and 45 adapter that they want to send me, I'd be stoked. But anyway, the normal automatic start and stop functions all work even without those parts. To play a record, you'll lift up this arm and move it to the right. Then you place your record. Today we're playing Rhapsody. Then you select the size of the record with this selector switch here. It has options for 7, 10, and 12-inch records. Then you'll select the speed. This one's a 33. I always dust it off first, just in case. Then we unclip the tone arm and press start. After a couple of seconds, it'll automatically place the stylus in the correct spot and begin playing. If you want it to stop playing at the end of the record, simply move this little arm over to the left. When the tone arm reaches the end of the record, it'll return to its little pedestal and come to a stop. However, if you want it to repeat, leave the arm over to the right. If we had the record changer spindle during the repeat process, it would drop another record on top of the first one and begin playing it. But as it is, we can just use it as a repeat function. If you want to just play a specific song, you can just lift up the tone arm and carefully set it in place with this little handle on the side. The platter will start spinning as soon as you move the arm, and it'll stop when you bring it back. However, once it's playing, it's better to hit the stop button so you don't risk sliding the needle across the record and scratching it. The turntable platter is belt-driven and made of plastic, so it doesn't have a whole lot of mass or momentum to eliminate wow and flutter, but I don't really expect that on an inexpensive machine like this, even if they did add a nice chrome bevel around it. As we'll see later, the capstan on the tape player, however, has a pretty hefty flywheel, which is nice, if not a little surprising to see. The tone arm is not counterweighted, and it presses pretty hard on your discs, which is typical of a lot of lower-end turntables. You can see the large part on the back of the tone arm is actually empty. It also doesn't have an anti-skate adjustment. However, if the needle isn't hitting the correct spot when it sets down, under this rubber bushing, there's a little plastic screw which will adjust the drop position. Be careful turning that because you really don't want to drop the stylus directly onto the rubber if you overshoot it. Remember, we talked about that in my video on the realistic LAB2100. Let's look at the back real quick before I demo it and show you the inside. There's not a lot going on back here. You have 2 screws for the external FM antenna and the RCA jacks for the left and right speakers. This machine would have been sold with an optional pair of SB-556 speakers, though you can use whatever speakers you want, really. I tried it with my Martin Logans, and although they're very anachronistic, it also sounds surprisingly good considering how much I paid for this, a whopping $2. Granted, we got it in a bundle of other odd stuff at the estate sale. Don't ask. But still, not bad for $2. My one complaint about the back is that the screws are inset in just such a way that it's awkward to get the spade connectors in without bending them and putting them in at an angle. But It's not really that big a deal considering I doubt most people would have even hooked an antenna to something like this. It's funny, the antenna really does help, and this can pick up quite a few stations clearly. So let's open it up. To do that, we just remove these screws. Don't forget this middle one, and the whole masonite panel will lift off. With it open, you can see the tape transport with its capstan flywheel, the AM loop antenna, the record changer clockwork, and all the pots and PCBs. And the transformer that I had to swap out because it stopped working halfway through filming. To be fair, it was my own fault. Don't worry, I'll admit the details of my stupidity in a later video. Every time I get a piece of equipment like this, there are a couple of things that I always do by default. One is to hit all the knobs with contact cleaner just to clean up any oxidation that might have shown up. And the other is to find the record switch, which always looks like this and has a wire or a spring or something linked to it. And I hit that with contact cleaner as well. Then I work it back and forth a little bit. It should go without saying that everything is unplugged when you're doing this. Now, I want to demo this for you, but as you're aware, I can't use copyrighted music, so I won't be using the turntable. So let's check that out real quick.
You're listening to one of the best shows in America.
Considering the fact that I didn't do anything to the electronics except replacing the transformer, which broke, and I paid a whopping $2 for this, I'd say that was pretty good. It's not a Nakamichi Dragon, and it's certainly not the precious One Ring, but if I was a teenager in the 80s and I got this for Christmas, I'd be pretty stoked. Pieces like this are a great way to learn about stereo equipment and to get your feet wet. If you're just starting out and you run across something like this for cheap, why not grab it? It's certainly a fun get, if nothing else. Now, there were a couple of things that were mild frustrations. The radio does tend to drift over time without an AFC. It's not bad, but after about 10 minutes, it gets a little bit staticky, and I have to fiddle with it to bring it back. That is annoying. The other issue was the tape carriage. There are two little leaf springs which hold the cassette in place, and they were a little bit loose, so the tape wasn't meshing with the cogs at first. I had to bend them out a little bit to make it work right. Not a big deal, but still a little annoying. Finally, I did go in and adjust the azimuth of the tape head as best I could to try to compensate for bending those springs, and it seemed to work pretty well. I should also note that I did have to change the belts as well, but I don't have footage of that because I was hasty and neglected to film it. But yeah, that's the Panasonic SG-V11 stereo music system. I hope you enjoyed that. I have some neat higher end stuff coming soon that we found recently, which I can show you once it's fully working and tested. So I'll see you soon. Keep thrifting. Stay metal.